Good afternoon. Today is Monday, the 24th of February, 2025, just after 1 o'clock. Welcome to UK Column News. I'm your host, Brian Gerrish. Delighted to be joined today by Diane, Rasmussen, McAdie, who will be joining us from Edinburgh, and also Ben Rubin, who will be joining on the link from London. Where do we start? It's very apparent to the UK column team that many people are really struggling to understand the news, all of the various reports that are being thrown at them. And of course, much of what people receive is to do with a fear factor. And one of those big fear factors, of course, is to do with everything around the Ukrainian conflict and the fact that Russia apparently is going to invade Western Europe. This is how the BBC is certainly trying to reframe our minds. So today I thought we'd take a little bit of a look at how things are going in Europe. And of course, no better place to start than Germany's new Chancellor, because he's been making some pretty strong statements. The BBC, of course, likes this. New German leader signals seismic shift in transatlantic relations. Well, what was one of the key things that he said was this: my absolute priority will be to strengthen Europe as quickly as possible so that step by step we can achieve independence from the United States. So that's a pretty powerful statement. Obviously, Trump has ruffled a lot of feathers because he's talking about the need for the European nations to get on and do things themselves, particularly if they believe that they need a credible defense against the Russians. And Germany, which is in a really pitiful position at the moment economically as a result of its own sanctions against Russia and the loss, of course, of cheap energy, is now suddenly saying, well, we need to increase our game, we need to strengthen Germany, and we need to strengthen the European Union. And the implication, of course, is that that strengthening has got to be around defence. Now, I'd like to say to our audience that if you go to the UK Column website and search for EU military unification, you can find many articles. These are just some of them. This is not a complete list that I'm showing you on screen. But the UK Column has been warning about the dangers of the European Union attempting to create its own unified military structure. And although UK has supposedly left the European Union, something else that the UK column team have talked about on many occasions is Brexit without the exit. And that is a warning that although the population of UK has been led to believe that we're clear of the European Union, in the background, no such thing has happened. And of course, we now see Keir Starmer almost tripping over himself to get back into bed with the European Union. And that also means with that European military unification. So how does this translate? Well, of course, for the population in UK, we're now to believe we're nearly at war with the Russians, and that means we need troops, and that means conscription. Let's have a look at how Good Morning Britain dealt with the issue in speaking to Tobias Ellwood.
British Supreme Allied Commander in Europe, that's the former British Army officer Sir Richard Shirreff, has said this morning that Donald Trump has left Britain with simply no choice but to plan for conscription.
But adults in Gen Z, that's 18 to 27-year-olds, seem reluctant to be part of the efforts, with a recent YouGov poll finding only 11% would fight for Britain. We asked some of them for their thoughts on joining the front line.
I'm not trained. I can't even walk up the stairs.
If it was mandatory, obviously I'd go.
I mean, the fact that you can die for your country before you can vote, there's no incentive for young people to participate.
I don't think I'd be very useful. It's just not my vibe.
Yeah, I probably would. Come from a family of people that have served in the Royal Air Force and Army as well.
I don't think I have a good enough reason to want to give back to this country in that sense.
It just doesn't seem like something I would enjoy.
But is the matter kind of out of our hands? Is it actually time, perforce, to make national service mandatory? Former Defence Minister and Army Captain Tobias Ellwood served in Northern Ireland and Cyprus, Kuwait and Bosnia, and he says that we simply have no option but to make national service mandatory. But senior lecturer in sociology, Dr. Lisa Mackenzie here, says that forcing somebody to do anything never works, and that includes conscription. All right, well, let's come to you first, Tobias, Mr. Ellwood. Do you feel that the time for debate has actually passed? Is that what you're saying? That it's not really a question of opinion now, it's simply a matter of we have to get boots on the ground and therefore we have to have conscription?
Yes, I mean, that's the backdrop to this, is that we've entered a new era of insecurity. Our world is getting more dangerous, not less. Russia's aggression is rising. It's increasingly backed by China. The United States is actually dialing back from its interests in Europe, and we are increasingly vulnerable, and we must prepare. There's been a big debate about increasing defence spending to 2.5%. We can't afford to keep a large standing army. So this is all about increasing our national readiness, this latent capability that we can tap into at any time.
Well, I don't know how our audience found that. I found the scoffing of Schofield interesting there when he was he'd finished the report on the young people in UK. Do those youngsters represent UK society? Maybe, maybe not. But Tobias Ellwood, clearly the war hawk. He says we're virtually at war. We need those boots on the ground, and the only way to get them is conscription. The lady, Lisa Mackenzie, sociology, who we didn't hear, actually went on to say, well, the problem is if people are not volunteers, they're not going to work at their best for you. And she's absolutely got a point in what she said, because, of course, the military itself would say that dealing with conscripts is particularly difficult. But, of course, remember that the trouble in Europe, largely fomented by the West with the UK, to kick off that war in Ukraine. And now all of a sudden we haven't got the money. No, it's been given to Ukraine, but we've got to raise those troops. Strangely enough, though, UK Column over many years has been able to report on the fact that our military infrastructure has been destroyed. Let's just have a look at this report back in 2016. This was talking about army fitness tests being rewritten to make sure female soldiers can qualify for frontline duty. That what was the result of getting the women into the military? A lot of problems, including the women being subjected to bullying and sexual assaults, which, of course, the military have tried to play down, but this is the reality of what happened. We've also seen a lot of the military infrastructure sold off, 10 military sites sold for 7,000 homes, and we were led to believe that every pound that they made by disposing of excess land will be reinvested into a defence budget that keeps Britain safe. But of course it wasn't. And yet at the same time, it was well known that the Russian military was becoming more and more capable. This is a report from 2016 where Lieutenant General Ben Hodges was saying that the Russian capability in electronic warfare was absolutely eye-watering. Now, I'd just like to jump across to another report from UK Column. We're going back many, many years ago when we said if you can't understand what's happening in UK at the moment, we're being attacked. And we particularly looked at this analysis, which Christopher Story had in his book, The EU Collective. And what it said is each area of society, education, media, culture, law and order is to be attacked. Let's bring this into focus by having a look at security and to see what this analysis actually said. Well, here's the text up on screen. What it was talking about was using methods to destroy our military capability, penetration and demoralization of intelligence community, police, military, homosexuality, etc. This is all from the book. Women in the military, collectivization of military power and security. And what was the intended result from this? suggests that there would be a degradation of intelligence quality, military power, and the recruitment pool, which is exactly what that Good Morning Britain report was talking about. Defencelessness, total unawareness of strategy, idolatry of cooperation. Think about what's happening with Europe, and the inability for the UK to act decisively and alone. And just as a further example, if we drop down here to internal politics, what was going to happen in that area? Well, let's have a look on screen. Politics was to be made aggressive, poisonous, full of antagonisms, a sense of drift, a failure to get to grips with issues, constant lying and equivocation, careerism and egoism. And what was the result? Infrastructure decay, national disunity, cynicism, posturing by the top leadership, lack of purpose, government by spin doctorate, and substance subordinated to image. And Ben, I'm going to bring you in here because to me, every time I look at this analysis, this country is under attack. The attack has been going on for years, and essentially it's to destroy our society, destroy our communities, and indeed to destroy our identity as a nation state. You've got to focus on Birmingham. And I think this is yet another example where we can see our institutions being taken apart from the inside. Welcome to the news.
Thank you very much, Brian. That was quite a sobering introduction, wasn't it? Yeah, I think we are looking at a rapidly accelerating collapse of the country. You've talked quite a lot about the military there, but it's happening absolutely everywhere else too. So we're talking about Birmingham Council. They have just been given a £180 million credit deal. They're describing as a credit deal to plug a financial black hole that's been created. And for me, this is indicative of this collapse of the nation that we've been talking about here, right? So the council went into administration last year. We talked about it on the news, and they've now been given £180 million by central government so that they can pass a legal budget, right? So actually, if they weren't given this money, they wouldn't be able to file their accounts legally. So this is a lifeline that has been handed out from central government, providing central funds to the council so that they can avoid filing an illegal budget. But this is, really just kicking the can down the road, isn't it? And what we're looking at here is a byproduct of the total decimation of our industrial capacity over a period of decades through globalization, so offshoring of core industries to the Far East and elsewhere, removing jobs from the economy. Also, in more recent decades, digitization and automation doing pretty much the same thing, which has reduced the tax base. But rather than trying to fix that and create a new economic system that will deliver well-paying jobs to the city, to the community, so that they can fund things like the council, we're actually just going to give them a line of credit from central government instead, right? And for me, this is the economic equivalent of using a credit card to pay your rent, something like that, yeah? Or maybe setting fire to your front door to keep the house warm. Maybe that's another good way of thinking about it, right? And this is being completely sacked from the inside. I shared this on my Telegram channel over the weekend. I said the barbarians aren't at the gate, they're running the council. And I think a lot of this is being driven by what amounts to sectarianism, ultimately. So Alex Thompson picked up on what I shared, and he pointed out that it's being suggested that the Muslim Brotherhood has taken over the Pakistani contingent of the council, and we're now seeing Northern Ireland-style sectarianism in the award of council houses, right? So there's a lot of tribal and racial stuff going on in the way that the council's being run internally, and it's leading to behaviour like what we're seeing here. And this isn't just happening in Birmingham Council. This is effectively the national strategy for the economy, right? So we talked about this Demos report last year, Only We Can Save the State. This describes a public-private partnership where as the traditional industrial base has been destroyed and actual paying jobs have been removed from the economy, councils and actually even national government are going to start, and I can quote here, rather than standing up to the big forces of development capital and working with them as equals, right? So that feels brave and exciting for people in government, not to raise taxes from their voters, but actually to go out to the markets and raise funds from international investors by selling off national assets, right? So what we're looking at here is a total upending of the order within the system.
And it's in our faces now, Ben. It's absolutely in our faces. So Stasi Starmer. Of course, do we trust this Prime Minister? I certainly don't.
Well, it's more of the same, right? So we've talked about the upending of the military, the upending of the economic system, the way that councils are going into free-fall collapse, and we're just seeing some absolutely astonishing behaviour. I'm going to refer you to this article from the Daily Mail from the start of February, where a Labour health minister, was sacked after a vile jibe saying he hopes pensioners who don't vote for the party die before the next election. Right. So in one comment, he basically said that a 72-year-old woman, he hoped that she'd be dead after she dared to ask about her bins being collected. Right. This is the kind of quality of people that we're seeing in government, and this is not a junior guy. This is a health minister. It's this gentleman here. See him with Starmer. So this is Andrew Gwynn, who is the MP for Gorton and Denton, and he's been sacked as a health minister because of this, and alongside another MP, Oliver Ryan from Burnley, and also 11 Labour councillors. And then just over the weekend, this was the Daily Mail headline from yesterday, and there was a big report on this. So this lady on the bottom right-hand side there, you can see this is Gwyn Jones, Mrs. Gwyn Jones. And she was posting in a private community WhatsApp group saying that one of the councillors who was suspended in the incident that we just described a moment ago should resign. And I think that's a perfectly valid opinion and a perfectly valid question to ask. Are you going to resign, councillor? This person should resign. And what happened is she received a visit from the police, from Greater Manchester Police. Yeah. AKA the Thought Police here, according to the Mail on Sunday, right? And Greater Manchester, we've spoken about a lot recently because this is where the grooming gang scandal that I spoke to Roger Meir about has taken place. There is essentially a cover-up of decades of at best we can say inept policing, but actually it's probably more like systemic corruption and a deliberate cover-up of crimes against children. But the police in Greater Manchester have got the time to be going out and checking up on pensioners for making statements that councillors disagree with. And this was done at the behest of one of the councillors that she was criticising, by the way. So we're looking at basically weaponisation of the police against the population by corrupt public officials. And again, this is just one more example of how this system is being used to terrorise us, frankly. And, more of the same.
Okay, and you've got a small advert here, which we had some discussion. I think we should pop it up on screen.
Oh, I did. Yes, apologies. I've forgotten about that. Right. So this was a response that I picked up on Telegram over the weekend. And, people are laughing about this stuff. And this is quite funny. Granny getting carted off by the police for committing a thought crime. But actually, this intimidation by state operatives is, it's extremely sinister. And it's got to stop.
Absolutely. Well, I'm just going to remind people that back in 2017, when Theresa May was busy eyeing up grain and oil and technology in Eastern Europe, clearly focused on Ukraine, we popped this slide up on screen. Theresa May launches Operation Barbarossa with an eye on those riches. British Conservative Prime Minister to risk lives of millions of young Poles and Germans in a drive to war in Eastern Europe. Well, they got the war, but they decided to sacrifice the Ukrainians, and now we are apparently to pay the price by having conscription to keep this rotten cabal in office with their policies, but more on that in due course. Diane, let's welcome you to the news. And north of the border, you've been on a little bit more of the fear factor, which was COVID-19. What have you been up to?
Yes, hello, Brian, and hello, Ben. Thanks for that. Yeah, this past weekend on Saturday was the Scottish People's COVID Inquiry, organized with Common Knowledge Edinburgh, which I've been promoting on the news recently. And we had Professor Richard Innes, who is the chair of Common Knowledge Edinburgh and an emeritus professor of evolutionary biology, was on with us recently to discuss the event. So I've got some photos and some coverage here just to kind of start a little bit of reporting, because this is very important information that needs to get out. This is just a picture of some of the materials at the registration desk, which I just wanted to show, because just to make sure that the UK Column business cards were out there, right, along with our materials with the program for the day and so on. The next photo I want to clarify is simply a joke. This was a badge that one of our members created for Nicola Sturgeon, care of HMP Sterling, a paroled attendee. Her badge was out the whole time. Unfortunately, she didn't show up to join us. Can't imagine why. So the introduction was done by Richard, and one thing that I think was really good to see that he started by saying to remind everyone who is speaking today has their own opinions, and maybe not everyone agrees on every subject, but that we all had the freedom to say what we wanted. And that included those of us who were giving presentations, as well as the people who were there, because this is meant to be an actual people's inquiry, meaning that nobody is censored and everyone can say whatever they believe, and not everyone has to agree, and that's fine. He went on to remind us, as we can see here, this is a very important point that several of us brought up, that on the gov.uk website, as of 19th of March 2020, COVID-19 is no longer considered to be a high-consequence infectious disease in the UK. That has been up there since 2020. It remains up there today. 4 days later is when the UK government decided to lock us up. He also reminded us, Jason Leach up here in Scotland, our former national clinical director, said on the 10th of September 2020 about the tests that we're informing everything that we did. He actually said, the test we have just now is a bit rubbish. I don't believe it got any better, unfortunately. The assumptions of the Scottish government COVID inquiry that have been going on, so far it's cost around £25 million as of September last year, and it's still very much ongoing. Their assumptions that they're working from is that there was, in fact, a novel deadly respiratory disease called COVID-19, a scary pandemic, a scary virus, that there were justified, unprecedented sets of public health measures taken. The Scottish government, as Richard said, is essentially marking their own homework by doing their own inquiry, and that there are lessons to be learned for next time, which to me seems to imply that there is going to be another pandemic. We'll have to see what happens. Our inquiry, however, for the Scottish people means that there are no assumptions. We were asking the question, was there evidence for this novel deadly respiratory disease in Scotland called COVID-19 in March 2020 or not? Was the information given to the Scottish people accurate? And what were the government actions taken? Were they appropriate, justified, ethical, harmful? And the context that we are working from is that everything is attributable to government actions, not the result of a so-called pandemic of a novel deadly respiratory disease. So I'm going to go through quickly some slides of the main speakers and just a little bit of their evidence that they each presented, just some highlights. The first speaker after the introduction was Dr. Alan Mordew, who is a retired consultant in public health medicine and an epidemiologist. He talked about the public health measures that were imposed on us. And one of the interesting things that he mentioned was that all of those ridiculous things that they tried to make people do was in direct conflict with the UK pandemic preparedness strategy, which was written and published in 2011. It's a 70-page document that you can find online. The link will be in the show notes. And just a few highlights from what they said. And remember what happened compared to what this actually said. It would be a waste of public health resources and capacity to attempt to halt the spread of a new pandemic influenza virus. During a pandemic, the government will encourage those who are well to carry on with their daily lives, and that they will put in place plans to ensure a response that is proportionate. Of course, none of that happened. My talk was called the COVID-19 Campaign, Propaganda, Lies, and Fear. I was asked to talk about the media messaging, the propaganda, the government, and so on. And I went all the way back to the predictive programming that we saw in the films such as Outbreak in 1995 and the film Contagion in 2011. Applied behavioral psychology used against the public with resources directly tied to the UK government, such as SpyB, SAGE, Behavioral Insights Team, and Mindspace. And I think I was the only speaker to actually mention globalist agendas such as the Great Reset and so on. So just as a quick reminder of what the propaganda was like, I believe we have a short video of some dancing nurses in Fife back in May of 2020. So they're not some of the best dancers that we saw. I think the other ones were crisis actors that were actually dancers. But anyway, there will be a full video that come out of all of the talks from the day, professionally recorded. But I do have a short clip here that was from the questions and answers from when I spoke. And just to set up this question that was asked of me, at the start of my talk, I disclosed to the audience that there was an NHS health board in Scotland who offered me money, a significant amount of money, to help them push the jabs on young people back in 2021. And I refused the money. And I believe that was actually the start of my cancellation as an academic. And the question was, then, you lost your livelihood as a result of your integrity, which was a nice compliment. Have any of the people who you previously worked with been in touch with you? And has anyone actually said anything to you? And I'm playing this clip because I want people to see the actual consequences of those of us who spoke up against the lockdowns and the jabs and so on. And here's what happened to me. No, nobody talks to me. I was working at Strathclyde in 2020. I moved to Napier in early 2023. I have no contact with anyone through this whole process. And then I continued to get canceled for things like my gender critical views and so on, ultimately leading to allegations of gross misconduct for speaking out on a podcast that wasn't related to my job because I made a gender critical comment. Nobody talks to me when I resigned and said that I was resigning. Nobody even said goodbye. I certainly didn't card. I certainly didn't get drinks out anywhere. I have no contact with any academic colleagues except for the very few, like Richard and others who have seen it. But for the most part, they were also complicit that I think I scared them away. And we used to sit around talking about how many vaccinations we had and how many times we had COVID. And every time I said I was never vaccinated, I was never tested, and I never had COVID, there's just silence in the room. There's so much complicitness that what you would think is at the top of what should be very intelligent, educated people, and they were all in lockstep with each other, kind of like Matthias Desmet's, sort of mass formation psychosis, which I meant to touch on. But the mass formation psychosis was so bad in academia because they're so afraid of losing their funding, of losing their research, of losing their positions and their status, that they were too afraid to speak out. So now they're all up in line with the World Economic Forum's agenda because that's what's pushing them, rather than the fact that they should be asking real questions and looking for real answers with real data. And this is where the corruption starts at the top, and it goes down to my former colleagues who will not even send me an email to say, congratulations, nothing. Yeah. So it was nice to get a small round of applause there, which actually happened several times throughout the day when anyone made a good point. It was a very lively audience, as you can imagine, with a lot of emotion attached to all this. We had Richard talked about some of the anticipated effects of the COVID measures, which the Scottish government knew were actually going to be happening. A massive increase in the death rate of care home residents through neglect, isolation, withholding actual needed medical treatment, and of course, midazolam and morphine, mislabeling these deaths as so-called COVID deaths, creating the illusion, and it was an illusion, that COVID is deadly, the generation of fear of COVID, both for the public and for the medical workers, the willingness of people to accept all the absurd and harmful restrictions, and the abandonment of medical ethical codes. Professor Martin Neal was another speaker who's a statistician and a co-author of the book Fighting Goliath. He talked about the patterns of death in relation to COVID-19 measures. He has a few very good points here. There was no evidence of viral pathogenicity before the behavioral changes to society. There was no virus before they made us start doing these things. In other words, the reattribution of deaths to COVID from other causes, deaths that did occur were caused by the medical and the public health response and were not due to a novel virus. On the next slide, every single policy not only failed to mitigate death from the so-called virus, but evidently made the situation worse. The COVID event was created primarily by fraudulent PCR testing, changes to death coding, and nitrogenesis, and he concluded there was no pandemic. Dr. Liz Evans, a retired doctor who is now with the Medical Freedom Alliance in the UK, talked about COVID vaccines and medical ethics. She had several urgent calls to action: a return to patient-centered medicine, protecting ethical doctors and whistleblowers, reestablishing ethical red lines, limiting the power of public health, outlining medical mandates, accountability in trials, justice for vaccine-injured and bereaved people, halting the COVID vaccine rollout, and a moratorium on the mRNA platform, period. And that includes the cancer vaccines and all the other vaccines that are coming down the line. Dr. Claire Craig was a diagnostic pathologist and the co-chair of the Health Advisory and Recovery Team, went through 6 delusions related to the vaccine and vaccine injuries. The whole world will burn is the first one if you don't get vaccinated. The idea that you are now unvaccinated just after being vaccinated, referring to those 14 days when apparently people weren't protected. Vaccines made Omicron less deadly. Omicron was never deadly. Omicron was never actually Omicron. Trials proved the vaccines were safe. The product was tested in the trials, and the vaccine injuries were very rare. Now I want to come to a bit of coverage from Richard / Biology Phenom, who provided a lot of the evidence that he pulled out of the official evidence, talking about the effects of COVID measures on people and human rights abuses. Let's play this video.
Your mum had a small funeral, 20 people in attendance. You couldn't touch her coffin. Again, I think this is material with which we are familiar.
If you all remember right, you could only get 10 people at a funeral.
Yeah.
There was between me and my brother and my kids and his kids, that wasn't even counting his man. He sat in a car park outside the church where Mum went into, outside the crematorium, in cars, and didn't even get to say a proper goodbye to their own sister. That was another thing my mum never wanted. My mum always wanted to have a send-off. Mm-hmm. She didn't get a send-off. No. We had to pick between our brothers and sisters who would actually get in to the actual, to get her cremated. It was the most horriblest thing ever. It was a bad enough time.
We also heard evidence from many witnesses regarding the restrictions in place on funerals, including the sealing of coffins and the restriction on the number of mourners in attendance. In certain cases, those restrictions caused family tensions, and family members had to take the invidious and difficult decision of who to invite to the funeral.
Absolutely tragic evidence there. I have some more information that I think I will hold off until extra time, but I just want to cover quickly the points that Richard was able to find by looking at this evidence. So just so far, he has found evidence officially, loss of basic and specialist medical care in the care homes, a rapid decline in the quality of life leading to death and in some cases suicide, severe impact of isolation in care homes, prescription of so-called just-in-case midazolam and morphine over the phone by GPs, the mere presumption of so-called COVID, the withdrawal of any other health care or dental care, and suspected COVID diagnosed if they were in a care home, period. Inappropriate blanket and forged do not resuscitate orders that were forced signatures that prevented legitimate medical treatment, powers of attorney discarded, denial of end-of-life visits by family, dehumanizing funeral restrictions lacking any human compassion, violation of human rights, including the right to life, freedom of torture and inhuman or degrading treatment, right to liberty and security, right to private and family life. With that, Brian, I'd like to move the rest of this to extra, but this is incredible that this has come out.
Diane, thank you very much, and thank you very much to you and the team there north of the border for sticking with this. Many people in the chat box are saying, yes, when we look back on this, it's incredible to remind ourselves of what actually happened and how the public in UK was treated. But we're dealing with some very, very dangerous people in government. And as I began the news, we are under attack. And I don't think, or I think that's becoming more and more obvious for people in UK. We're going to stay on the case. But thank you. If you like what the UK column is doing, please do support us. We can only do what we're doing with your support and financial help. So you can always make a donation to us or take out a membership, monthly or annual or a lifetime membership. Also, remember the UK column shop is still there, and making a purchase helps us out. And also we get a small percentage from Clive de Carle's health products. But the key thing for the UK column team is that we produce all of this material for it to be shared. Of course, we're censored on YouTube and indeed Facebook still. So to get this information out, we need your help as our viewers and listeners to share our material. Please do also give us a mention. Now, a reminder that tickets are still going, and I'm delighted to say very quickly for our UK column on location in Cheltenham on the 5th of April. So if you haven't got a ticket, please consider getting one. We'd love to see you there. And I think it's going to be a really fun event, very close as it is to the donut. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, do a little bit of research. Now, I'd also like to say that tomorrow we've got another interview going out in the child stealing by the state. This is a number of mainly mums that have come forward to talk about what's happening to their children. So tomorrow, this one is going out with a lady called Yolanda. We met Yolanda about 8 years ago, and we did briefly report on her case. But in this interview, I've been able to get much deeper into what actually happened. And I have to say, it is shocking, as they all are. But my point is that if we cannot be sure our families are safe, our children are safe from the government in this country, then there's little else that matters. So I'm going to say, please do watch and share. What else have we got coming up? Well, we've got the conference on the 22nd of February by Public Child Protection Wales, and Kim Isherwood and her team have done such fantastic work speaking out against the grooming, the sexualised grooming of children in our schools. Scottish People's COVID-19 inquiry. Diane's given us a really good run through what's actually taken place so far. But Saturday the 22nd of February was that event. That's now passed, but I'm sure that the committee will be carrying on with that good work. We've got Stand Up to be counted on Sunday, March the 16th. Doors open at 9 a.m. That's £15 entry. And as with all of these events, people need a little bit of money to help them do what they're doing. So if you can afford that, please give them some support. And academics for academic freedom, we've got another event coming up on the 27th. Diane, do you want to say a few words on that?
Yes, this is a free event in Newcastle. If you are in Newcastle or can get to Newcastle, please join us. So this will be a debate about free speech, no ifs, no buts. So Dennis Hayes, the director of Academics for Academic Freedom, is emeritus professor and helped me quite a bit during my cancellation as an academic, will be speaking. I will be down there earlier in the afternoon. So if anyone wants to get together for a pint or something before the talk, I'd be happy to meet you. And I'll be interviewing Dennis, and I will have a report on this event next Monday.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Well, I'd like to take our audience back into thinking about what is actually taking place in this country and why we're now in such a chaotic situation. We can clearly feel and sense breakdown happening around us. Is this accidental? We suggest not. This is something that's been planned for a very long time. Let's just jump back to 2010, and we've got David Cameron here launching the Tories' Big Society plan. What was that all about? Well, let's have a look at this little clip of the great man speaking.
The basic question is, what is the best way to run our country? And my view is that the big top-down government solutions to every problem, that isn't working anymore, and so it is time to try something different. And I think the idea of the big society is trying to help individuals and communities and voluntary bodies to come together and find solutions to the problems that we have, whether it is the provision of good schools or feeling you want to improve your neighbourhood or whatever. But yes, so that's the big idea, is that you're looking for big society answers rather than big state answers. But if you want to sort of break it down into its three individual bits, I would say, first of all, it's about devolving power to the lowest level so that if people want to play a bigger role, they can. It's about opening up the provision of public services. So again, if people want to play a bigger role in health or education or policing, they are able to do so. And it's also about, the third element is the thing that I think people most associate with it, which is social action, voluntary giving, voluntary action, volunteering, the whole of the voluntary sector, which obviously has been going on for thousands of years. I didn't invent the big society. It's been evident in many of our communities. What I want to do is just make sure that we do more of it, that we enable people to play a bigger role, and community groups and voluntary groups to play a bigger role if they want to.
So essentially he only said one thing that was true in that. He said he didn't invent big society, and of course he didn't. That was invented by the radical Saul Alinsky, whose book Rules for Radicals was dedicated to Lucifer. But if you think that big society policy that David Cameron talked about disappeared, on the contrary, it didn't disappear. We are now living it, which is why we've got utter chaos around us. And Ben, just very quickly, your earlier segment in the news talking about the Birmingham Council and what was happening, this is the direct result of the big society attack, which is that the government power is to be extended to the lowest possible level. Don't know whether you'd like to say just a couple of words on that.
It's absolutely everywhere. You are completely right, Brian. That was a great example. And then another one that I'm seeing a lot of, which I'm going to talk about in the next week or two, is community business. There's a new category of business, which is community business, which means that it's partly funded by the state. Right? It's a total breakdown of the normal order of things, and it absolutely sits in this Alinsky big society category.
Right. And these are the sorts of things that we've got to focus on, because when we understand how these things are being done, we've got a real chance of stopping it and overturning it. But first of all, we've got to watch the magicians at work. And if you're a Christian and you think that David Cameron was a man who attended church with his family for the best interests of the country, here's an independent report that UK Column picked up in 2016. It was talking about David Cameron's constituency office calling the police on food bank campaigners, the Bishop of Oxford and the Reverend Keith Hebden. But in the article it said this: David Cameron said in the Church Times that Britain should be evangelical about its Christianity, and in a separate claim made earlier this month that the Conservative Party's Big Society initiative was, quote, continuing Jesus's work. This is so vile and cynical, but of course it tells us exactly what's in the minds of the party. And if you're going to rebuild a state, if you're going to bring in orchestrated chaos, you must destroy the old before you can bring in the new. Then you need to delete all the records. So let's just have a look at this report. And what have we got here? This is 2013. Tories deleted 10 years of speeches and press releases from the party website. Why do you do that? Because you don't want people to be able to look back and see see what life was originally like, or what the Conservative Party originally said it was going to do, or indeed was doing. You need to eradicate all that so that the chaos that's brought in can be blamed on, the ordinary people in UK. So big society, a political weapon to destroy the nature of the UK. And this is what we are now experiencing as we sense this collapse around us. And of course, at the time, it was only the UK column that was talking out about this. This is one of the double-page spreads from the original UK column printed newspaper. Top left, pay attention, we've got Saul Alinsky. Both the Conservatives and the Labour parties were adhering to his tactics to destroy Western society. And if you have a look at to the left of your screen, the areas that are being targeted: community empowerment, national citizen service, pilots, opening up public services, that's to the private sector, community funds, social investment markets, and social action. There's Saul Alinsky, but if we run on down, you can see that we've got big society capital on the right, and we warned about the creeping state legislation and doctrine to control our lives. But interestingly, when we get to the bottom, and let's highlight this, David Cameron was talking about building an army of young people, activists, change agents who are going to be employed in all areas of society in order to change the country. So when we now hear about conscription, of course, that conscription isn't just military conscription, because the same Tory government the Labour government is now staying on the Tory policies, and the agenda is to get youngsters into the army, but also into the NHS, the Coast Guard, many other areas. Young people are to be tools of the government, and this is very clear. And let's also remember, if you're concerned about how could this possibly jump between parties, well, again, this is the UK column in 2013. We warned about what Tony Blair had been saying. So he was quoted in one of the internal Labour Party magazines that the Prime Minister had a vision of a new Britain. Central to this vision is the creation of a new class, a new elite placed in positions of authority who will propagate the new spirit of the age and spread the principles of the third way across Britain. And of course, if you want to do that, then you need to apply psychology. And we were also warning at the time about what we called a viper's nest of behavioural change at the heart of government. These were some of the organisations involved, Charity Nesta, but also David Halpern, the CEO of the Behavioural Insights team. And we'd also warned of the Cabinet Office Mindspace document talking about us having our views and values changed and not recognising it. But we were also highlighting this organisation, Nesta, and we were pointing out that once again we've got a mix of so-called public policy and people in very big global institutions and think tanks. And I'll just add this one from 2015, when the UK column was a lone voice warning that we had a government, the Lib Lab Con, as we called them, saying that 1 in 4 of us are mentally ill and need help from experts. And if you think this has gone away, well, here's a document from 22-23, In Our Hands, Behaviour Change for Climate and Environmental Goals. So very clear to us that the behavioural change is a weapon, and it's being used on a daily basis by our government. Ben, let's bring you back in, because, of course, you've been following the people who are enacting these policies, which are being used not only to destroy UK, but other Western countries and indeed the United States itself.
The entire global system, and you're absolutely right, Brian. These people are still active, and NCS, just to pick up on one example there, National Citizen Service, David Cameron is still the chairman of that, and they're a key partner to My Life, My Say, who helped get Starmer elected last summer. So this is absolutely relevant right now, today, in this country and further afield. And this is what I'm going to talk about now, just another exemplar of this. Last week, I talked about this organisation, Project Dandelion, a women-led global campaign for climate justice, making every issue a climate issue. They wear these badges. They're extremely well connected. They're all over the place. And I demonstrated a link right from the very top of the global financial system, so the G30, which is essentially the oversight board of the Bank of International Settlements, down into Project Dandelion, and the fact that they're using this as a way to create 2 billion change agents, essentially 2 billion women change agents all around the world in order to bring in this totalitarian top-down reordering of the global system. And I'm pleased to say I actually found out where it came from. Right, so I've done a bit more digging on this and the networks around it, and it all goes back to this organisation, Connected Women Leaders, which does exactly what it says on the tin. This is a global network, hyper-exclusive, founded in 2017, and I'm calling this the VIP room of the Lady Boss Industrial Complex. Right, this is the trend that we're seeing. Lots of very high-powered, well-remunerated, generally very privileged and already wealthy women in positions of power and authority in politics and in the economic system, who are colluding with each other, conspiring with each other, frankly, to push this whole agenda forward. It was founded by these three ladies. So that's Pat Mitchell, who's a big-time US media figure, calls herself a dangerous woman. Rhonda Carnegie in the middle there, who I believe is from the Carnegie dynasty. So she's formerly top exec at Condé Nast in the US, worked at the New Yorker. She was a founder of TED Talk fame. And also Hafsat Abiola, who is a young global leader of the World Economic Forum. Right, so these are the three ladies who run it. And the link to Project Dandelion I actually picked up from Rhonda Carnegie's LinkedIn profile. She basically says here that Project Dandelion is a Connected Women's Leaders a flagship initiative. That's how she described it. And let's hear a bit more about what the program is all about from the three founders.
We need now, more than ever, a community of women leaders to share experiences, knowledge, and support.
We need a place for women to come together to share stories across geographies, backgrounds, and generations.
We need a place to tackle the biggest problems our world is facing together to create just, equitable, sustainable solutions.
This year, we launched the Connected Women Leaders Resource Hub as a place where emerging leaders can connect and learn, where a global community of women leaders of all ages can come together around a shared purpose to identify and implement the commitments necessary for the generation equality vision to become the reality for all women everywhere.
The systematic problems that Connected Women Leaders Network wants to tackle are not new. The difference is that we are leveraging the lived experience and expertise of women leaders from many different disciplines and backgrounds to collectively shape new ideas, innovations, and actions.
CWL is one branch of a larger ecosystem committed to the goals and actions outlined by the UN Women's Generation Equality Forum. With this tool, we aim to activate a network of networks that connects the CWL community and other like-minded organizations and allies.
Connected Women Leaders was created to accelerate and activate.
To be the bridge between change makers
and the changes we want to see
and be in the world.
Doesn't it make you feel great? Justice, equity, knowledge, support, that lovely music going on in the background. What could possibly go wrong? So this is funded large part by the UN, as far as I can ascertain, and certainly connected into that network. So they referenced this, the Generation Equality Forum. This happened in 2021. This organisation has been running for a little while before that. And it says here that the forum launched a 5-year action journey to achieve irreversible progress towards gender equality, founded on a series of concrete, ambitious and transformative actions, including $40 billion in financial commitments, right? This is a huge global gravy train, and these women are feasting on it, quite frankly. And it's all designed to transform the system ultimately everywhere, and it's backed by all these people. So there's a bunch of national governments in there: France, Georgia, Mexico, South Africa, Sweden, Tanzania, the US. You've got the Gates Foundation in the mix, the Children's Investment Fund, which is Chris Cohn, who's a key Blair ally, Fridays for Future in the bottom right, that's Greta Thunberg, and $40 billion is coming from these organizations and being distributed into these networks in order to influence all women everywhere. Right? Emphatically, all women everywhere. That's what they're targeting. And there's a big focus on lived experience, and that means subjective opinion, right? That's what lived experience is. There's no facts required. You've got to tell us what you feel and what you think, and we'll build things around that, right? And it's a network of networks, importantly, right? And that all intersects around what they call the faculty, which is quite a grandiose way of describing this. It suggests there's an academic background to it, but I don't think that there is. And there's about 100 ladies on this group, and we're talking as connected as you can possibly get. You've got the editor of Time magazine, you've got various people running bits of the UN, you've got the Skoll Foundation, you've got E3G, which is like the global hub for the climate transition, the technology that is supporting that. There are people from the Gates Foundation, the Rockefeller Foundation, you've got Julia Gillard, the former Prime Minister of Australia, Siobhan Haviland from the British Chamber of Commerce, Yang Lan, who I wasn't aware of, is basically the Chinese Oprah. And this is a fully international initiative, right? So you've got people from the US, Europe, Middle East, Africa, China, the whole shebang, right? And all of these networks, and we talk about a lot of these organizations and a lot of these women all of the time, right? If you look back at reporting over the past 12, 18 months, certainly what I've been talking about, a lot of these women are coming up on a consistent basis, and they're all members of this group, and Dandelion is an outcome of the work that they've been doing, right? So this is an extraordinarily powerful network. And to give you a sense of the types of people that we've got in here, I already mentioned that a lot of this is, very privileged, well-heeled, liberal, progressive type women. You've also, on this leadership group, you have the lady who is the founder of this thing, which is the Omega Institute, which describes itself as a vibrant centre for lifelong learning, spiritual exploration and community building, which is a place where these ladies go to meet and talk about the programs that they're implementing. And you can just see on the left-hand side there that a 5-day program with a private room costs nearly $6,000. To go and do yoga and carve up the $40 billion in the huge global gravy train. When you're not doing that, you're going to the UN and getting full access to the UN General Assembly to launch a big international program so that you can spread dandelions all around the world and frankly cause chaos. Right? This is a lot of what this is about, I think, just causing chaos everywhere so they can bring in this new system.
Ben, thank you very much. A couple of people asked while you were talking, but what can we do to stop these organisations? And my instant response to that is to talk about them. Once you know they're there, talk about them, expose them to other people, and start to pull apart, of course, what they're doing, because at the end of the day, this is all about mind control on the people that are not the chosen leaders. We'll talk more about this in extra time. Diane, let's bring you back on because you've got a bit more to say about COVID.
Yeah, Brian, I just want to say that if there is anyone out there who does believe that we shouldn't look back and hold people to account for what they did to us in 2020 and 2021, there are so many reasons to show why we can't move on, because they're still using applied behavioral psychology to create fear in us. And there, again, but chaos and breakdown that you've been talking about during the news that we've been working so hard to make people aware of. And COVID is still an example of what they're continuing to use, the media and the lies that continue. We can't leave behind the vaccine damaged, those who have lost loved ones due to the vaccines. And I do this for my mother, who was killed on a ventilator in December of 2021. So we're seeing now some mainstream sources talking about this. It was a small study, but still significant that it's out there in the mainstream, from Yale, saying that these scientists have linked the jabs to an alarming new syndrome, as they said in the title here from the Daily Mail, causing distinct biological changes to the body. They've talked about the spike protein being around in people and all these things that they mentioned, the details. They're calling it post-vaccination syndrome, according to these researchers. And I know that for UK column viewers, this will not be new, but I think it's significant to see that some of this is starting to go out into the larger public. I think it's just becoming harder to hide. And I'm sure that almost everyone knows someone who's been negatively impacted by these jabs. And also, we now have a new relative to COVID that might be coming out, according to these researchers from China. They have found a new virus that could infect humans in the same way as COVID-19. It's called HKU5-CoV2, saying that this virus, I'm saying that with inverted commas, does not enter human cells as readily as the SARS-CoV-2 does. But they did report that it was a bat virus. So this is starting to sound familiar. And we see on the next slide here a very cartoony looking graphical abstract of the virus and how it can spread between different types of living beings. To me, again, looks very cartoonish, but this is from the journal Cell. And you can see the actual abstract and the graphical abstract, which will be linked in the show notes if you really want to see it. There's some things I've come across just in the last few days. I did not know until this weekend that there is a COVID National Memorial Wall, which is in London. It apparently stretches for 500 meters alongside the River Thames, directly opposite the Houses of Parliament. There are more than 240,000 individually hand-painted red hearts, each representing a person who died in the UK with COVID as a direct cause of death. It was done by a campaign group called the COVID-19 Bereaved Families for Justice, and they organized the mural to give a visual representation to each life lost. There's a photo of Keir Starmer from March of 2021 when he visited this particular mural. And I just want to quote what he said. This was in the Sky News article. Remember that Boris Johnson was still the prime minister, and Keir Starmer said, the prime minister should meet the families and not just listen. The most powerful thing about meeting the families is hearing what they have to say. And I think we owe it to every single family to hear them and to hear them properly. Okay, then, Keir Starmer, come talk to families, find out what's happened to us. So also, just in case you need something to do on the 9th of March, it is the COVID-19 Day of Reflection, according to the UK government. The UK Commission on the COVID Commemoration was set up a few years ago to find appropriate ways to remember those who lost their lives since the so-called pandemic began and to explore how we mark this period of our history. After some consultation with people who were impacted, they decided that a day of reflection would be appropriate. And this is going on for a few years, and this year's is on the 9th of March. And if you want to know what you can do on the COVID Day of Reflection, I have a video from the government that will show you exactly how to celebrate.
2025 marks 5 years since the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic. And on Sunday the 9th of March, people across the UK will once again join together for a day of reflection. It's a time to remember those who lost their lives, the sacrifices made by many, and the impact that the pandemic had on us all. There are a lot of ways that you can take part in the Day of Reflection, whether it's organising your own ways to remember in your community, joining a local event, or remembering in your own way at home. You can take part in a way that feels right for you. Explore the Day of Reflection website to find ways to remember. 2025.
And I think, Brian, I'll just leave it there. I don't have anything else to say to that. I have no words.
I don't blame you, Diane. Well, truly terrible. But if we sum up our news today, we are absolutely saying, we're looking our audience in the eye and saying to you are being attacked by your own government and its agencies. This is becoming ever more clear. And of course, fear and anxiety of two of the key weapons used by those behavioural insight teams. We're absolutely going to stay on this theme, and we're going to be lifting the lid wherever we can. We must end it there, though. Thank you very much for joining us wherever you are in the world. And if you do some research, make sure you get yourself out and about in the fresh air. relax and take pressure off wherever you can. And the other thing is stay cheerful in doing what you're doing, because we know that Keir Starmer and his team really hate anybody in this country who is still happy. So I'll leave you to think about that. We'll be back in a few moments for UK Column Extra. If you remember, please join us then. Bye-bye.